night tonight. I'd like to introduce Brian Halliwell, who's spoken at Preston New Horizons, St Anne's New Horizons, and at the Pro conferences. And is a regular visitor to Preston and St Anne's. We welcome him here tonight with his talk on the World of Synchronicity, meaningful coincidences. Are coincidences attracted by us, by our state of mind or being? Or do we just bump into them? Try and make more of them than actually exists? Well, let's find out. Please welcome Mr. Brian Halliwell.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me at the back?
Yes.
I might get louder. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's good to be back to do this World of Synchronicity. And in a lot of ways, this is a big subject and a controversial subject. And to do it in one night is difficult in some respects, but I'm going to tell you what I can and cover most of the important bits. And if I leave you after tonight with food for thought, and your mind's open and receptive to the ideas, then from a speaker's perspective, I will have succeeded. Like most people, I am interested in mysterious subjects. I love the paranormal, like we all do. The ghosts and the life after death, do they exist, do they not exist? We can debate it forevermore. Like subjects on ufology, that's another great favourite. The aliens and the flying saucers, do they exist, do they not exist? If they do, what do they want, where do they come from? We debate it from now till doomsday. To more earthly events and mysteries, like one that's fascinated me since I was about 15, and that is the mystery of the Mary Celeste. In other words, the missing crew on that sailing ship. And I've been fascinated with it for years, and I think it's kept everybody going for about 130 odd years. And despite all the conspiracy theories, the wacky notions and solutions, they now think they've solved the mystery of the Mary Celeste. But that is another story, and not for tonight. So all sorts of other odd events that happen around the world all the time. And I'm going to give you some examples now. Like, for instance, on December the 5th, 1668, a ship sank off the Welsh coast and one passenger survived the disaster. His name was Hugh Williams. On December the 5th, 1784, 116 years to the day, another ship sank with 60 passengers. One passenger survived the disaster. His name was Hugh Williams. On December the 5th, 1860, 76 years to the day, another disaster, another ship sank. Everybody drowned apart from one passenger, and his name was Hugh Williams. So 3 disasters, ship disasters over a period of 200 years, and the only survivor was a man with the same name. And that's all. In 1678, there was a conspiracy to kill Charles II. The Titus Oates conspiracy implicated Catholics. A magistrate was murdered. His body was found on Greenberry Hill. 3 innocent men were hanged for the crime. They were called Green, Berry and Hill. And that's all. In 1837, Edgar Allan Poe wrote a novel called The Narrative of Arthur Pym of Nantucket. It tells the story of 3 desperate shipwrecked sailors adrift in a lifeboat, and in order to survive, they killed and ate the cabin boy, a lad called Richard Parker. 47 years later, in 1884, in real life, Captain Dudley of the sailing ship the Mignonette was tried and convicted for murder. When his ship sank and he was adrift with his companions in a lifeboat, to survive they killed and ate the cabin boy. His name was Richard Parker. In 1898, Morgan Robinson wrote a science fiction novel. It was called Futility. It told the story of a gigantic ship, the largest in the world, supposedly unsinkable. It crossed the Atlantic and collided with an iceberg, and the ship's name was Titan, and it sank. And then, 14 years later, in 1912, we had the Titanic. During the First World War, a United States soldier was on board a troop ship torpedoed off the French coast. He survived but lost all his possessions, but he survived the war. Back in America, years later, he was walking around Brooklyn, around the beach, and as he was walking on the beach, he noticed something washed up in the shallows. He bent down and picked it up, and it was an old army-issue shaving brush. It looked familiar. He turned it over, on the back was the owner's name, and it was his home. It was his own brush after all those years. In February 1957, an old man aged 90 was killed while walking over the Blue Lagoon Bridge in California. 2 years later, his son was killed on the same bridge when a truck overturned and killed him. 6 years later, his great-grandson, aged 14, was killed by a car on the same bridge. A Bulgarian widow's husband, Randolph, was killed by lightning. She got married again. The second husband was also killed by lightning. This double tragedy drove poor Martha into a depression, so much so that she had to go and visit the doctor to get some tablets. The doctor was a lovely man, he'd cheer her up no end. So much so that she fell in love with this doctor, so they started going out, and then they got married. And a short while after the wedding, he decided to go into the backyard to do a job, and he was struck by lightning and killed. A triple tragedy. In 2000, widower Stuart Spencer completed a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle, a present from his daughter. It was a lovely picture. When he completed the jigsaw, he looked at this lovely picture of a paddle steamer sailing down the Norfolk Broads. And as he looked at the picture, he suddenly recognised somebody sat on a chair at the back of the boat. And it was his late wife, who died in 1997. In other words, the jigsaw was made from a photograph that somebody had taken while them two were on a holiday down the Norfolk Broads. What about this one? In 1974, a young man aged 17 died when he was knocked off his moped by a taxi in Bermuda. 1 year later, his brother was riding the same repaired moped in the same street when he was knocked off and killed by the same taxi with the same driver who was carrying the same passenger when the other lad was killed. In 1991, Christine Baroni, aged 19, was killed by a train at a level crossing. 4 years later, her father was killed at the same time, at the same crossing, by the same train, driven by the same driver. And last but not least, on this little section, in 2001, Laura Buxton of Stoke-on-Trent released a birthday balloon. It was found 140 miles away by a girl called Laura Buxton. Both girls were 10 years old, both girls had fair hair, both girls had a pet dog, and both girls had a pet rabbit. In other words, these are strange, odd events that people call coincidences. Strange and inexplicable events that happen by chance to each and every one of us. But we either miss these events or they pass off unnoticed. And if we do notice them, well, sometimes we shrug them off and think they're not worth talking about. They're only a bit of a coincidence. And that may be true. But for me, they are worth talking about because I've been having these odd events happen to me all my life. And I only wish I had written them down and recorded them. I would have had a book full. But the last couple of years, I did start to write them down and record them, just so I wouldn't forget them. And I am glad that I did, because it gave me the idea for this talk. So I'm going to share one or two of my experiences with you before we get really into the story of what's happened to me. And I feel sure that not only will it give you something to think about, but I'll be surprised if you don't start nodding your head and thinking, oh yes, that happens to me too. Like, for instance, taking the easy ones first. It's like when you've not seen anybody in years, might be 20, 30 years, and then you suddenly see them twice in a week. It's like when you haven't thought of somebody for a long, long time, then within a day or two you pass them in the street. It's like I bumped into a colleague of mine only a few months ago, and she's called Janet, she's a buyer. I said, Janet, are you alright? She says, no, I'm agitated because we've got a problem at home. And I said, what's that? She says, our shower is leaking. We can't get a plumber out, my husband can't fix it, and there's water all over the bathroom. And I'm thinking, oh, that's a terrible problem. So she dashed off in her agitation. And I remember thinking, oh, that's terrible, I just hope that doesn't happen to me. Then when I got home that night, my toilet was leaking and there was water all over the bathroom. It happens, doesn't it? It happens. It's like when I was on my way to Kirkham, one Friday to do a talk in Kirkham, one Friday morning, and I was booked in to do a talk at 10:30 in Kirkham. And as I'm driving down into Kirkham, down Downbridge, I suddenly thought to myself of an old friend of mine who I've not seen in years, old Stan. Used to work with him, and he retired and never seen him in years. And I suddenly thought, I wonder what he's doing, what's happened to him. So I drove into Kirkham, went to the club, did the talk, came out about 11:30, quarter to 12, Kirkham, Friday, packed out. As I drove into Kirkham, I drove through the town centre, stopped at the lights, and as I looked through the passenger window, there was Stan walking past my car. He could have been anywhere. He could have been in the house, on his holidays, in the garden, in a shop, anywhere, but he just happened to be passing my car as I looked through the window. All these examples happen to all of us. It's like another one, which I'll just mention this one. It's like a few years ago, I had this old car and I knew I had a battery problem. Terminals wouldn't fit properly, so I needed to tighten them up. So one night when I got home from work, I thought I'll tighten the nuts up. Could I find a spanner to tighten the terminals up? I knew I had one, but I couldn't find one anywhere. In the toolbox, in the garage, in the shed, couldn't find it. I even tried to use spanners that were a bit on the big side, but used packing to try to pack it up. It wouldn't work, so I just give it up as a bad job, and I thought, I'll go and buy a new spanner tomorrow night, on the way home from work. So on my way to work the next morning, I walked it to work, it's only half an hour walk for me. So I'm walking down into Preston, and I carry on walking down Strand Road. You might be familiar with Strand Road. And I walk down Strand Road, I walk straight to the bottom, past the Lidl on the left, past the Harley Davidson motorbikes, and I cross at the crossing, go through a blue gate and into work. On this particular morning, as I arrived at the top end of the Strand Road, I could see I couldn't do that because I could see down at the bottom of the Strand there was a commotion, a diversion of some sort. The road was blocked off, the police was there, so in other words I had to across the road 200 or 300 yards further up. In other words, halfway down. So as I'm crossing Strand Road, halfway down, not in my usual spot, as I'm crossing the road, I noticed something glinting in my eye. Something silvery in the road. As I walked across the road, as I looked down, I picked this up, it was a brand new chrome spanner. And I knew it would be a perfect fit. And when I got home, it was. It fitted that nut perfectly. Now, normally I wouldn't have seen that because I've been going right down to the other end. It's like a few years ago when I was researching a talk on musical comedians. And I thought in this talk, and it's about 7 years ago, I do this talk regularly, and I thought I'll include a comedian who comes from Bolton. And his name was Ted Loon. Anybody ever heard of Ted Loon? Thank you, John. Is that all? He was a famous comedian. Well, I thought I'll include Ted Loon in the talk because he was one of my favourites in the early 60s. Because I don't know, well, it says most of you are not familiar, but he played this gormless comic with a coat on and a cap on. And he used to come onto the stage, and his early routine, he used to stand there and he would say, I've received a letter from my mum. And then he would read this letter out, and it was always very comical as he read this letter out. And the opening lines was, he used to say, I've received a letter from my mum. Dear son, the lady next door has had all her teeth taken out and a new fireplace put in. And it went on, and it was very comical. So I thought, yeah, Ted Loon, we've not seen him in years. I will do the Ted Loon sketch in the talk, and that will just raise a smile and get a laugh or two. So I thought, I'll put him in. So I started to research the life of Ted Loon. I got the books in the library, it told me all about him, where he was born and where he lived, what school he went to, what job he did, how he got into comedy. Couldn't find anything about this letter in the comic routine. Went on the internet, googled it, everything about Ted Loon, his life, when he died, who he married, the lot, but nothing about the letter. I thought it's strange, like there should be something there. So I asked people who remembered Ted Loon, who thought he was a great comedian, and yes, some of them remembered that letter. And they remembered that bit of a joke about the lady next door in the fireplace, but they couldn't remember the next bit. Neither could I. So I carried on researching and looking, and I couldn't find any information out. So after about 12 months of trying, I just give it up as a bad job. But I thought to myself, one day I will find out the contents of that letter. About 4 years later, I am down in the Isle of Wight, staying in Sandown for about 4 days, and on the Saturday night, I decided to walk from Sandown along the coast into Shanklin. Nice night, 4-mile walk, right along the coast, it'd be great now. I was recommended to a pub in Shanklin, so I walked it the 4 miles, went in the pub, had a couple of pints, watched the band, and then I thought it's time to walk back. 4 miles back, that's a nice 8-mile round trip. as I came out of the pub, it had started to rain. So I thought, typical. Carried on walking through Shanking Town Centre. The rain got harder, so as I'm walking down, I thought I'll have to take some shelter. So I jumped into the nearest shop doorway to shelter from the rain, and it poured down. But while I was stood there waiting for the rain to stop, I thought I'll just take a look at my surroundings and see where I am, and I'm stood in the doorway of a gift shop. Lovely gift shop, all sorts of things being sold, and as I looked in the window, amongst all these gifts, hanging there from a little rail was these typical tea towels that you get in all the resorts. And as I idly read this tea towel, on that tea towel was the contents of Ted Lew's letter. So you get the answers somewhere along the line. And the shop was shut and I couldn't go in and buy it. But I read it, memorised it, and when I walked back to Shanklin, I got it down, so I had the contents of that letter. So it's amazing where you get the answers. Somewhere along the line, in the most unexpected place, you find out the answers. Even trivial events have the weirdness and the odd thing that happens. I'll just tell you this little last one here. It's like years ago I used to work about 9:30 in the morning. Always went about 9:30. And on this particular morning when I got up, it was nice and early, I thought I'll go to work early and give them a shot. I was ready for about 20 to 9, I thought, right, car keys, go to work. Couldn't find the car keys anywhere. Weren't in the kitchen, strange. Weren't in the dining room, looked everywhere, couldn't find the car keys. Living room, under the cushions, by now the air was blue. Where's the car keys? I suppose we've all had that problem. Upstairs, under the pillars, nothing. 9:25, still no car keys. I'm well late. Well late. And all of a sudden, I spotted them on the dining room windowsill. Big bunch of keys, obvious. How could I have missed them? I still think to this day that somebody was tricking me. They vanished and somehow rematerialised out of thin air. I'm convinced because I couldn't find them for 40 minutes and it was obvious it was there. So I grabbed the keys, jumped in the car, straight to work, exasperated. When I got to work, 10 to 10, really late, everybody having a go and all the rest of it. So flustered, I sat at my desk. First thing I did was turn the calendar over, and the thought for today was, we never know the value of things until we have lost it. Never a truer word was said. Right at that instant, out of 365-day calendars, that was the thought for today, the day I lost the keys. So in other words, what's going on? That's the question we have to ask. It's only when I came across an article, by coincidence, written by Carl Jung on synchronicity, that I started taking a bit more notice of what was going on, because in that article were some very interesting points indeed. Very interesting points. Carl Jung was a Swiss psychologist, and he was a thinker, and he was a colleague of Freud, and he also opened up his own school of experimental psychology. He was also interested in many subjects, and he was interested in many subjects, especially occult subjects. He was interested in clairvoyance, telepathy, astrology, and he also introduced 2 new subjects to the world of psychology. He introduced the collective unconscious and synchronicity. But before we get into his theories, just let's take a look at something that Carl Jung said. He said that if we want to learn anything about the human psyche, we'll learn next to nothing from experimental psychology, and that's his own subject. He said we'd be far better off travelling the world, looking at things as they really are, exploring the full spectrum of the good and the bad in all its forms, no matter what it takes, and by doing that, we'll learn a lot more and reap far richer rewards than we would do by studying textbooks a foot thick. In other words, what Carl Jung is saying there, that we modern humans rely too much on science and logic and could do with taking a bit more spirituality with an appreciation of the unconscious realm. His colleague, Freud, he said the goal of life was to make the unconscious conscious, and as a theorist he made that his life's work. But if you've read Freud, he painted a horrible picture of what the unconscious realm was like.